welcome to Radio Adyashanti. My name is Mukti, and I'll be leading this evening's session, or it may be afternoon or morning, wherever you may find yourself in this world. I've gotten an incredible number of people writing in questions for tonight. It's really unprecedented for me on these shows, so I want to thank you for really engaging this broadcast. And for those of you who didn't write in, we've got quite a few fantastic topics tonight that I'm going to do my best to weave some of them together with this initial few words by way of introduction, or maybe lengthy words, we'll see. Yes, so I was reflecting on many of the topics and seeing where they might intersect. And it brought to mind a memory, a little vignette of my life that I think was very, very telling. And it was early on that I was dating Adyashanti. At the time, he went by the name Steve. And we had a long walk on a beach here in California, and we were talking about various things and just getting to know each other. And he asked me this question, which was, what do you value more, truth or happipiness? And at that time, I was probably in my mid-20s or so, early to mid-20s. I immediately had the thought, and I might have said right out loud, well, happiness, of course. Like, who doesn't want to be happy? And I remember at the time I was almost confused by his response, which was that he would much more value truth. And I think part of that confusion came from me really not knowing how he might be referencing that word. And I wasn't so familiar with some of these teaching circles that you might be finding yourselves in, and all the various ways that different people use this word truth, or point to an experience of truth. And my reference point pretty much was lying in the realm of, true versus false. But even at that, I wasn't really reflecting deeply upon his question. And so over the years, I've often thought about that memory and been in this ongoing inquiry at some level of my being as to what it is that truth really means and how different people use it and what it might be referring to. And if I value it in the same way I value happiness. And I have to say that over the years, much of my whole inner way of being organized has shifted. And I'd have to say, if somebody asked me that question currently, if I had to choose sides, I would perhaps choose truth instead of happiness. But what I've seen is there's a tremendous intersection of these two. And before I get to that, I just would love to welcome you into this inquiry of what it is that you feel truth is, how you might describe that for yourself or for somebody else. And I just want to give you a few moments with that before I share some of my own thoughts on that question. So I think that some people might use the term truth to point to some experiences that are more elemental in our being. We have so many phrases in our English language anyway, things like something having the ring of truth, a true pitch, or a true note, there's that sense of people saying something resonates as true. It aligns with a sense of what feels true or right. And so often the word truth at this level is felt in a very sensory kind of way, whether it be auditory or kinesthetic, even seeing something visually being maybe true plum or those kinds of things. And so there's a kind of way that we might organize in a very elemental way around this sense of truth that we can feel in our senses, a sense of resonance and alignment. And I think that often there's a way that happiness can also help us feel free of any tugs or forces that cause us to feel off or out of balance or off the mark. There's a sense of well-being that comes with a feeling of happiness that's much more of the whole of our being. And often, in order to just sort of have that overall sense of well-being, whether it's elated happiness or a quiet contentment, there's often some element of being very in tune with the moment, being very present, feeling more aligned in our being, whether we sense that physically or we just simply sense an absence of feeling off or pulled away or maybe caught in the past or grasping toward the future. And so I think over time, at least for myself, I've seen greater and greater sense of intersection between these notions of truth and happiness. But I'll tell you why, in particular, this story came to mind, and in part, it was inspired by a few of the questions that related to these waters, so to speak. And I want to read one of those questions to you tonight and just share with you where I'm going with the question, because there's lots of different ways you could respond to this one, or I might respond. But it's a shout out here from Hawaii, from Robbie and Shannon. It begins with an aloha mukti. My friend and I on Oahu were just sharing about ownership, quote unquote, and how we are attached to things, attached to relationships, attached to making another happy through a sense of guilt, or perhaps I think they might mean through a sense of needing to relieve themselves from a sense of guilt if another's unhappy, is what I'm guessing. Therefore, feeling responsible for another's happiness, etc. The ownership, and then there's also an additional sense of ownership of guilt or depression. We tend to own emotionally, physically through learning to own things. Can you please speak to this either next Tuesday or live? Thank you. Mahalo. So I wanted to thank you for this question. I think that there's many ways that we can learn that it might be our responsibility to contribute to the state of mind or the state of being of another. Sometimes we learn that through words of how we should be behaving or what we should be attending to or responsible for. But also sometimes we learn this through absorbing certain things through either perhaps modeling, healthy or unhealthy, or maybe just through a sense of feeling when the discomfort of when we're in the presence of someone else who's unhappy. There might be a way of just wanting to relieve ourselves from that discomfort. and wanting to do the best we can, not only for ourselves and our own state of mind, but for the other person as well. And there can be many factors at play there. Some might feel more self-serving, so we don't have to have that difficult feeling to experience. But it also, many things can be very much in service to another from the response of our heart to another's pain or discomfort. And so some of this response is learned, and some of it is self-learned, you could say. So I thought of this story about Adya asking me would I prefer truth or happiness, because I feel that it brings up an ongoing contemplation about where happiness, or we could say contentment, arises from. And there might be a whole spectrum, as I mentioned earlier, to happiness, from something more quiet to just a sense of, okayness or being in alignment or feeling more contented, all the way up to feeling the various degrees of, positivity that we associate with things that are, more and more expressive of a more alive happiness that often may have greater qualities of brightness or levity. And so when I have contemplated this question about what brings about happiness, I've really considered that whole gamut. And in my own experience, the desire to have, more high happiness is seems to be tempered over my life experience and through realization and connection with other forms of happiness that may not be as outwardly bubbly or elated, but kinds of happiness that may delve into other realms, such as contentment, or things like peace or equanimity, a sense of right, like just feeling things are on the mark or right or settled. There's other things that might come to play, like they just feel healthy, or they feel like they bring about a sense of overall well-being. And to me, these really make up a larger picture of this health of happiness factor. So, so degree of happiness. So when it comes to the happiness of ourselves versus the happiness of another, I think that it can be really important to just get a sense of how we organize around happiness and a greater and greater understanding of how it comes about. And I think that's important because there's the happiness that seems to be more tied to a person's current state. And then there's a kind of happiness which might be a little bit more closely associated with truth, which is a sense of our true nature, our essential being that sometimes gets covered over. But when we are in a practice like this, we may continue to sort of peel back distractions and layers and misconceptions to try to discover at our core some sense of fundamental existence, aliveness that may exude a greater sense of just essential well-being. And there's been many pointers to this. I can recall so many times that Adya speaking about a sense of that which is always and ever okay, a sense of brightness. Sometimes he's asked, like, in your meditation, is it bright? Is it alive? Is it bright, or has it gotten sleepy or hazy or disengaged? And so this fundamental sense of happiness that's not so much a feeling of the moment or a feeling of the circumstance, but a fundamental sense of being in touch and connected with our essential being and inherent brightness of consciousness. And so this that I want to speak about now is tied into many of the topics that were addressed in the questions that were written in. And I think it's an important thing to take times like this, like connecting through the internet, connecting in person if that's available, to a sense of what is it to put this knowledge of essential essence of being that not only lives within ourselves but within each person, and to give space for that in our lives, like you're doing right now as you tune into this show, to bring that forward in our consciousness and in our felt sense of being, and to connect with that in ourselves and in this field of gathering here virtually, but energetically in a very concrete way. And so some people have asked how they can experience this more directly. And some people have also written in, like one person wrote in a question about quietude of mind, and if that's accessible in this modern age of busyness and frenetic energy that may be pulling for our attention in many, many ways. And the answer to that is yes, it's accessible when there's a real interest in prioritizing that, and when there's some direction and doorways that you might come to know about. And I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. So, I think probably one of the most famous doorways to this would be the heart center. And there was a chant that I have sung a lot in my life that I was exposed to at a very young age, and it's a chant by Parmanzio Gananda. And the words speak these lines of, door of my heart, open wide, I give to thee. And it's this sense of opening our heart to the presence of God. And that's a kind of attitude of being that one can engage in. And this is a more devotional approach to being able to sense the presence of the divine within ourselves. And that need not be a sense of God that is other, but a sense of our very nature that is expressive of the divine that's inherent right within us. And so sometimes there can be the sense of feeling separate as someone who's separate from that and not knowledgeable of that. And from that perspective, one might chant, that their intention to have their heart open to the sense of presence. And that's a wonderful place to start, is with intention. And so those of you who have had questions like, is it possible to sense divine nature more experientially, which is one of the questions. Is it possible to have a quiet mind? Many of these questions we come to answer for ourselves when we have the intention really clarify that that's something very, very important that we want to come to know in our own direct experience, in your own direct experience. And so you might have a question. For example, the folks in Hawaii might hold this question, what is happiness, and how does that come about? And is that something that is, and how is it evoked? How is it come about within ourselves? How is it evoked in others? And might it come about or be evoked differently than, let's say, we were told or taught that it comes about? And so I love that. I think it was Shannon and Robbie are asking these types of questions, but if you notice, I'm kind of helping shape the questions a little bit more and encouraging that this is something that you can live with in an open-ended discovery. And it's the same thing with a question like, is a still mind possible? It can be an open-ended discovery. Is it, another question, is it possible to further my spiritual path and to have more direct experience of true nature? And once again, this is something that can be turned into a question to lean into. It can be something like, what is the deepest thing that I feel in this moment? And right now I'm pointing back to the heart because I was mentioning that earlier as a doorway. It seems to me, as a person who's talked and a lot of people in a spiritual counselor capacity, that some people have access to this sense of heartfulness more readily than others. Some people might have a greater dose of just like curiosity of mind that wants to see things more clearly, and that might be their doorway is through a kind of inquiry of clarity and wanting to see what is really rings true to them and seems the most resonant and real. But for those who are interested in developing this capacity of heart or playing to that strength, there can be a way of holding questions about where you might orient from in your intention to further the flowering of your consciousness, to further this sense of deepening your realization of the sense of what is in this moment. But I think one of the greatest hints that we have is back to this sense of truth that can be felt in a way that resonates, that rings true, or is on the mark, or on point, or lines up. And so even holding ourselves physically and energetically in a posture that feels more aligned can be very helpful, and to hold ourselves in a posture that's more open and available for a state of receptivity is also tremendously helpful. So to shape a question that might be come more from the heart can look a lot of different ways. So I'd like to maybe throw a few out there for you to try on or consider as inquiries. So let me just take a moment to form those in this moment afresh. So one might be, what is it that I long to realize, most deeply? And that's a nice open-ended question, because it's not necessarily grasping for something and trying to seek it out, which typically doesn't work. It's typically more effective to tune in to what's already present and alive within us. And so you can drop a question into this area of the heart center, a question such as, what is it that I most deeply yearn to know? What is it that I most deeply value, that I want to know more intimately, more clearly, and more thoroughly? And the act of dropping the question into the heart produces a dramatically different effect than posing the question to the mind that may search its databanks for answers. The dropping questions into the heart is a way of evoking the heart's wisdom and evoking direct experience to inform us what is very dear to us, what is very important to us, what is very essential, what is very core. Yogananda used to speak of things being dear and near, and being the nearest of the near. So just like very, very elemental and core, what is truly and deeply important. So one person had written in with the question of having various kundalini openings and having that being unfolding for many years, yet still feeling like there could be more progress in terms of realizing the essential nature of being, her own being, the essential being that's alive and present in all things. And I think this is often the way, is holding a question very, very near, in a very core way, so that it percolates and lives in one's being and is invited to inform your being in an ongoing way and in an ever-deepening way. And so this is not orienting toward a realization that's outside of ourself, but it's evoking what is alive in our own essence, in our own essential being, that is the essence of life all around us as well, in its conscious state. So as far as I know, I'm hopping around a little bit. I'm hoping that you're tagging along with me here. As I've spoken about before, and what I'm about to say is largely informed by various things that I've heard from Adya and run through my own inner laboratory, but also just discovered on my own as well. And it seems that when we can align around what's deeply important, and so we're aligning energetically, as I said, being more open, but also giving our attention something to align around, then we have something more powerful, because we're giving not only our body awareness and our body consciousness to the state of being more aligned, but we're giving our consciousness in a very deliberate and pointed way to voice an inquiry question, to voice an intention, to become more realized, for example. And the act of giving our attention in this way is an act of furthering the spark of consciousness through that energetic transfer of our attention that takes the shape of an intention to inform an inquiry that can evoke and beget a spark of awake consciousness. But it requires the investment of our attention to be gathered into something like intention, like an inquiry that we live with and we hold in the core of our being, and we might say in our heart, especially if we're more of a devotional nature, or just in the very core of our sense of energetics that would just kind of cook something with our intention. And it's a little bit different way. Some people kind of expand more in devotional states and feel into the world around them to attune to what's near and dear. But other people, or even in the same person, might also gather their energy into intention and into inquiry to really charge that sense of transformative power that can spark consciousness to be more bright within us, can spark it to overpower the energetics that might pull us off away from that intention into things of less importance. So sometimes when I'm speaking, I'm also just kind of gathering. I'll pause. It's as though I'm kind of resetting and coming into a kind of quietude to be present for what might spark and further this talk or any talk that I might be giving. And so there can be this way of becoming very quiet to sense the subtleties in this heart center, or subtleties in the field. I'm not sure how it all works, but there's a whole field of all of you listening out there. And sometimes I feel that in the quiet, there's a kind of field that is intelligent and pregnant with intelligence that somehow just seems to inform me, like, let's say, where to take the next portion of what I want to share tonight. So I have lots of strands going in this talk, the part about intention, attention, the power of offering our consciousness to something, the interest somebody had in quiet mind, the interest that somebody had in happiness, and how that might be encouraged in another. Somebody else had written in something similar, which is how might they, ignite a greater sense of spiritual interest in another. And I think that where I could knit some of these together is asking you if in your own direct experience, when you shine the light of your attention on something, it could be anything really. It could be a task. It could be a person you're listening to. It could be a sense of a subtle feeling within your heart center. When you shine the light of attention, do you notice that what informs that attention, the very sense of awareness that is being focused, do you notice that that awareness seems to be free of movement? It may track movement, and it may track something very, very quick and frenetic, or it may track something very, very subtle. But the attention itself doesn't seem to be defined by movement. One might say that this sense of the source of the attention, or the awareness that informs that focused attention, is by contrast, you could say that it's still. It may not necessarily feel moving or still. It may feel like it might not really apply to either of those things, perhaps because it's not something in its essence that can be grasped or located and pointed to. But there can be some sense, we could maybe say, because our language is limited, that which informs attention seems to be absence of the movements that it is tracking. And so this might be a new way of considering stillness of mind that somebody was talking about. It can often seem impossible to still the thoughts that are moving around, much like it may seem impossible to steal the wind and stop the wind from blowing the trees or the leaves or the cars going by. There's lots of content in the moment that's bubbling up and expressing and moving and changing. And it may seem beyond our power to even stop our inner world, our inner microcosm of all of its movements and tendencies. But we might get a sense of that which is aware of these things, that which is even tracking them in a very specific way, or if your attentions are relaxed and open and global, there might be some sense of a kind of field of attention in which everything that comes into our attention arises and presents and then passes away in. And so this can be helpful if you're contemplating stillness of mind, to get a sense of that which is absent of movement and yet is very much kind of reified by movement. It's like the movement of all of these things that presents a contrast to that which is unmoving, and therefore gives us recognition of that which is absent of movement, just simply by way of contrast. If there was nothing to contrast it, it would be hard to maybe even impossible to reference. I think it would probably be impossible to reference that which is free of movement, because it would require movement to reference. So in this way, this can give us an entry point into this question of stillness of mind. It can also give us an entry point into how curiosity that shines the light of attention on any given thing. It could be the question about happiness. It could be the sense of presence in the heart. It can give us a sense of how that light of attention is maybe not only free of movement, but it also carries a kind of brightness. It literally can feel like you're shining that light of your attention on things. It may not necessarily be experienced as light in the way you may experience the light of the sun or the light of a lamp, but at some level there might be a way of, oh, maybe this is a new realm of light, just like the attention may feel like a new version of stillness because it's not expressive of movement, essentially. The light of attention may not be expressive necessarily of all of the kinds of light that we normally think about, and yet it can be its own expression of light. And so when we offer that light of attention to something that is expressing, it's moving, that which is moving and expressing can tend to feel the presence of that which is bearing witness to it. It can tend to feel the presence of something that feels, by contrast, more still and more bright. And then it can respond to that. And often anything that is given attention will kind of grow and thrive and blossom. So when we give our attention to presence in the heart, it can become more alive. It can begin to thrive more. It can begin to take on that sense of light and that sense of a condition that's more still, and it can thrive in that setting because it's not being pushed against or thwarted or suppressed or denied or pushed down. It can actually come up and become more alive. So what I'm working my way around to for our Hawaiian friends, I think it's Shannon, excuse me, my memory isn't great, Shannon and Robbie? Yeah, Shannon and Robbie, is that there can be a way in which we might support another's happiness through the very light of our attention and that gift of attention, which can often be in the form of listening. Sometimes it can be in the form of quiet listening. Sometimes it's a really engaged, active listening, and it may be more verbal. It can also be in the sense of space, which, since awareness in its essence is without boundary, it can also be that things thrive with a sense of the unbounded. And we can offer that in our own humanness by, giving a sense of space for another person to express and have their experience, whether it's happy or unhappy. And it's a way of not departing from that person, but actively engaging them with these various gifts that we have inherent in our expressionist spirit, which in large part I'm calling awareness tonight. So there can be that listening that's more of a quality of that which is more still or less interfering with that person's experience. It can also be more spacious, and it can also be organized around a sense of brightness. So there is a way of listening and connecting with another person where even energetically and through our disposition and our relating, we're actually connecting to that person's brightness, that person's spirit, that person's heart, that person's consciousness. And this ability to connect in this way can be fostered. It really can. It can be something that's fostered by a question, like, can I perceive the essence of this person as they're expressing this state or conversing in this way or acting in this way? Can I see who they are essentially that's not defined by their state? Can I see like the light in their eyes? And sometimes it's more subtle, sometimes it's more bright. Can I sense the essence of their being that may even feel unharmed or untouched by the difficulty of the experience they're having? Can I rest more strongly in the expression within my own self as spirit, as awareness, so that it might be more bright and more alive and more palpable to the other person, so that their spirit might pick up on that brightness and that allowance, that space, that quietude, so that those qualities within them may also spark and feel supported and nourished. So I think that these are some important things, and I really, really encourage you to keep it open-ended, to keep the questions alive, to keep them engaged throughout your days, and to keep leaning in to your curiosity about them. That hopefully isn't solely mental, because that often gets more dry and more mechanical. But if it can be that your curiosity connects you energetically with yourself, like below the neck and in your body, the part of you that might orient more toward the subtlety of awareness that might convey a greater sense of stillness, or might convey a greater sense of brightness of being. And we all have this brightness of being. We know it because it lights up when we hear about things that nourish our very soul, or our very core, our very essence. But instead of just recognizing those as experiences where sometimes you feel high, or if you feel, more sparked or bright, to kind of sense or to sense more directly and question, what is that brightness of being? Might it not only be elicited from the outside, let's say when somebody gives me attention, or when somebody expresses something that feels really juicy or really interesting, might it also be supported through my own nurturing of that, with my own attention and my own interest, my own caring and devotion to what seems deeply important, truly important, which brings us back to that sense of truth, that which really rings as truly important. So I thought I'd start there tonight, and I just want to see if there's any questions that maybe I didn't touch on so much yet. We're doing questions a little bit differently these days on the radio show program, where we're having people write in, and I'm just answering them directly. Okay. So I had a couple questions on the topic of anger, so I want to make sure I read at least one of those. So this is somebody who wrote in earlier from Virginia. Dear Mukti, I've been experiencing anger more than I ever have. My husband is the trigger, but I don't sense that he is the cause. That's a very conscious thing to say. There's a really, there's a great difference between associating someone as being the trigger versus the cause. The anger I experience is so insistent and like a fire that I can't put out. I have spoken to him about it and have tried to find ways to alert him when it takes possession of me. Sometimes I am not very skilled at this part of communicating what is happening in me. I take space for myself. I do the Qigong movement you have in the video with the loud ha sound and the chopping movement, and I meditate. This is something on the Yogic Qigong with Mukti that's on our website, and it's on I believe YouTube as well. You can Google that Yogic Qigong, QI space GONG with Mukti, and you'll see this wood chopper Qigong that's helps move the energy that can get stuck when we're angry, that gets stuck and then wants to move and explode. But this wood chopper gives it a channel to move that can be more healthy. And then this person from Virginia said, is there a way to see this anger that could extricate me from its spell? It is old, very old anger, baby anger in a woman's body. It is a process I am in, an anger process. Thank you for sharing some thoughts about this emotion. So yes, I know you very well up there in Virginia, and I thank you for the question. Well, I'll tell you how I've worked with it. I don't have a background in a psychological approach to this that I know of, but I want to tell you a few highlights and tips that I found are helpful with anger. And I'll say a few generally, and then I'll say some that I think might be specifically suitable to you in Virginia there. I think it can be important, as some of you may have heard me say, to kind of know about the movement of energy in anger. In Chinese medicine, they give a tremendous context for anger. They talk about it, anger as energy that becomes stagnant. It becomes stuck. What we're wanting to be happening, it's not getting traction. It's not happening. And so that energy is stagnant. And they speak about how stagnant energy, it has a lot of power in it, right? And it wants to move and move beyond its stuck dynamic. So it often will either implode and pull more energy into it and pull our consciousness into it. And sometimes then we'll go into states like, depression, despondency, despair, or the energy might start to explode instead of implode, and that exploding is more like irritability, frustration, upset, anger, rage. And so it's just good to kind of know that in the midst of anger, there's some real stuck energy. So sometimes it's just very helpful to do practical things like the wood chopper, kind of movement with the breath and sound and the body. A lot of people exercise when they feel anger. Some people, do a punching bag or hit a pillow and all those things. But that doesn't necessarily make us more conscious of the methods of how that anger comes about or arises, nor does it necessarily appease the origins of that anger, let's just say. So let's just take, when you spoke about baby anger in the email. Let's just take an angry phrase like, you're not paying attention to me, or you're not listening to me, or one of these kind of things, there can be a sense of needing a greater degree of attention, a greater degree of being heard, a greater degree of being listened to. And these are some of the qualities I was just talking about earlier in tonight's broadcast. We can sometimes very much be at a deficit for that sense of connection to true nature. And that connection to true nature, we might not even think to call it that. We might just say, think like, wow, I want greater engagement of somebody listening or paying attention or prioritizing my interests, my needs, my person. And we might associate that with something that we get from the outside, and that certainly is a blessing when we do. But it also can be something that we give on the inside. And I love that, as you wrote in this question, you said, is there a way to see this anger that could extricate me from its spell? Well, I think that in large part it might begin with the first part, which is the way to seeing this anger. And I think as a rule, what I found really helpful, aside from kind of knowing the energetics of anger, is to kind of sense what it wants. Like I was just saying, often it's attention or time or caring, presence, those kinds of nourishments of light and of light of attention and listening, quietude of listening. But I think that thinking about anger as something that is a dynamic or a kind of a pattern that is calling for something. It needs something. And so if you can set aside even briefly, your desire to get out from under its spell, which is completely understandable, but to try to think of it like almost to personify it, and to think about it, the anger itself, as needing something, or as trying to communicate something that it's asking your attention to register. So then it becomes within our power to give this energy, that whatever energetic signature of anger is there, however it's playing out in the body, whatever direction it's moving, or whatever intensity it has, we can offer our attention to that dynamic. And it could be at an energetic level, but also as we give our attention to it, even some of the particulars of the belief structures or narratives about that emotion can also enter into our consciousness when we make our attention and consciousness available to it. And so if it's helpful, you can personify the anger as like a little baby that needs attention and is crying for that attention and insisting upon it. And you can play both sides and also be the adult that stops and sits in your meditation or goes for a walk or whatever it might be, and really dunks or delves your attention into that sensation, or into just like an open-ended intention to know this more clearly, and to continually come back in that really form of devotion and dedication to the process, and hold your attention with it. It might help if you hold a certain inquiry with it. It could be just, how might I see this more clearly? Because you use the word see, almost asking the sensation that, like, how might I see you more clearly? How might I come to know you more intimately? And the question itself may evoke an engagement of your attention. So without being able to dialogue over this back and forth, those are at least some things to maybe get you started, and to sense, and this goes true for just about every emotion and almost every inquiry that you could have on the spiritual path, what I'm about to say, is when you offer the gift of your dedicated attention to something, you're imbuing it with consciousness. You're actually transferring your consciousness to that pattern so that it becomes less unconscious and less just automated and like triggered, and then it just does its dance. It becomes more present. It becomes more conscious, and it begins to open and harmonize into that field of the conscious awareness that you're giving it, and it begins to uptake that consciousness and begin to express in a more alive way that is less just sort of asleep and automated and on its hamster wheel of what just kind of gets triggered every time it's pushed. Instead, it begins to open and reveal, and things will register in your mind more, in your heart more, in your memories. It'll awaken more of who you've been prior to that locking in of that pattern. And so a lot can happen in the gift of that consciousness that tends to impart a sense of spaciousness, because consciousness is ultimately unbounded. It imparts a sense of listening. It imparts a sense of seeing. It imparts a sense of quietude or stillness, at least by contrast to the part of anger. So I said that there was something in particular I wanted to mention to you, and it's really to everybody, but it can be very, very helpful for anger, which can feel like it's just too much to contain or too dangerous to try to, just let it open and express. It can be very helpful to remember, especially if you've developed this, like I know you have, who's written in, is to sense, what if I could offer this powerful sense of anger the conditions of my nature as the infinite? So your nature as the infinite, and you can get a sense of this through, if you have a sense of awareness that's without edge or boundary, and how that awareness may register in the body, and especially down in the belly and the lower part of the body. It's a sense of rootedness to the earth as the body awareness kind of comes alive, especially from the waist down. There can be a sense of stillness and unboundedness. It doesn't necessarily mean, I don't mean like vastly big, I just mean not contained. So that stillness and that unbounded awareness of being has an energetic signature in the body that's different than the strong energy of anger that feels bottled up and wants to get out. This has all the room in the world. It never was confined. It doesn't essentially have an edge or a boundary or a fixed location like the anger does. So if the anger can get a sense like there's all this space in the world for you, even more space than in the world. There's lots of space. There's stillness that registers in a way that's very rooted and grounding. So as the anger wants to rise up like a flame that's whipping around, if you have your consciousness and your body awareness on that which is hunkered down and low and anchored, it provides a ballast for this energy. And it's almost like a flame that instead of whipping around and rising, it starts to burn more straight and true and reveal in a way that's less unsettling for the system, because you can have the intention and bring your awareness to being very, very settled. And so this energy that's unfolding, it will be uptaking that stillness and the consciousness of stillness, and it will feel more satiated and more smooth. It's less rough and more smooth as it kind of uptakes and harmonizes with that stillness. And it'll feel, the anger itself, if I personified it, it would be as if it feels like I'm being supported to express and to release, because there's space for it, because there's a counterbalance that can hold the power of that anger. If you think you yourself are doing it, it gets a little overwhelming and frankly not even, very helpful at all. It can even unsettle a person. But if you have access to that anchoring and that stillness, or you can be in the presence of someone that can provide that, and that you can kind of, what do they call that? Like, you could just say hook into, but you can, they can be a surrogate kind of for that energy for you. Then it can be very, very helpful. So since 2 people had written in about that, I'm hoping some of those pointers are helpful. And you can always let me know. You can always write in. Okay, so we have just about another 20 minutes, and I hope you're all hanging in there and learning and maybe journaling. One person had written in about their heart, speaking of journaling. And I know you will too, Bill. It says, good to hear from you. And I'm glad that your home is safe from the fires, from everything I've heard. I hope that's accurate. Dear Mukti, due to past conditioning, my heart became very closed to survive, but now I would really like to have it at least a little more available. A couple of years ago, you suggested putting my attention on it, meaning the heart center, which I continue to do, but could you suggest something more I could try to help in this process? There's probably lots of things I could suggest, but the thing that came to mind today, which is what I'm going to share tonight, Bill, is I think it might be a really worthwhile practice for you to journal. And I want to tell you why. You might be like, oh, that's not what I wanted to hear. You might be like, oh, I really wanted to hear that. But let me tell you a little bit more and see how it might resonate. So in Chinese medicine, they talk about these various channels, energetic channels that leave this area of the heart center and flow down the arms into the hands and the fingertips, and in particular these middle and pinky fingertips. But mostly it's just good to know that that heart is really supported, the heart center is really supported by the use of the arms, that we hug one another, or we namaste, or we hold our hands on our palms on our heart. Just this relationship with the hands and the heart and the arms is one that is a beauteous thing. And so there's this extension of the arms. You might, begin to write and ask and live with this question, or draw and ask, like, what might I want to express from my heart through my hands? And no one else need, see it or judge it or know it. This is more, again, trying to step outside of yourself, kind of like with the anger, and then letting the anger take the lead and have some center stage, giving it your attention, in the person in Virginia and others, to be present for that to inform you versus trying to do something about it. It's kind of like that with the heart. There can be an opportunity to create an activity, some space and some time. It's just dedicated for your heart to express. And so, like I said, it could be through handiwork or journaling or art. I believe you're good, wonderful with tools, to maybe woodworking, to just see if you can have that time be intentionally a time for you to pour your heart into that activity or to let your heart express. Some people do this in a new myriad of other ways as well, through touch, through song, all kinds of things, prayer. But whichever kind of activity speaks to you, it might be nice to have this heart-hand connection, because I know you're wonderful with your hands, and see if you can live with this inquiry of how might this time using my hands or journaling or whatever it might be a time for my heart to take the lead and to express in any way it might want to. And what's nice about that is it might help you kind of feel like it's your job to open your heart. It's more like having a faith that the heart, when given the right setting and context, and being invited to come forward, may love that and respond amazingly to that in ways that it might not have been able to if it felt like it was being, pushed, or like some people want to feel in their heart so deeply. I'm not saying this is you, Bill, but they'll just almost want to wring it for every emotional, sense that may make them feel alive and connected. And that can be very wearing to the heart to be put upon a lot. And so just having that free, open invitation for the heart to express in however may it want, and it may just be like quiet, just being so content not to be pushed at or poked at, and then maybe over time it might grow in a sense of trust that you really do want that for that part of yourself, and it may begin to over time express more and more. So I hope you'll make that your own. Okay. All right, so I've covered quite a few of these questions. Here's one that I might just, I think it'll be a more brief answer, although it's not an easy topic. It can, some things can be answered sometimes more simply, even if they're not easy. So, this is a person who says, Dear Mukti, I started meditating with centering prayer about 3 years ago. After about a year, I started to get problems with my body. I got gallstone problems, stomach aches, and after an injury in my feet, they got overly sensitive. I've been seeing a lot of doctors, but they find no reason for the stomach ache or the oversensitivity in my feet. They're guessing that it is my brain that's interpreting normal nerve signals as pain. My question is, can this have anything to do with meditation? I have a lot of energy movement and pressure going on during them from about the time that the body problems started. And if it should be related, is there anything I can do about that other than just accept it? Well, I don't know enough information, nor am I you, so I can't exactly say what the cause of this sort of intersection of energy movements and physical sensations like stomach aches or oversensitivity in the feet. I just don't know quite enough to link it all up, but I do have some things I could offer. And I think that it's important, whether we have energy kind of constellating as an ache or a pain, or whether we have energy moving, let's say, like some people talk about Kundalini energy, or that might cause pressure, or it can just be your garden variety energy that's not necessarily Kundalini, just causing pressure. So in any case, whenever you have energy presenting in a specific way that causes aches or pains or difficulty, it can be helpful. It's not necessarily like the only, the golden pill or the golden answer, but it can be extremely helpful to live with an inquiry of how you can best support it. And this isn't just a mental inquiry. This can really be a kind of engaging the light of your consciousness, the light of your awareness, and linking it with your body awareness as sensation in a given part. It could be your feet. Like so. Let me give you an example. So, sometimes we're just going about our day and we don't even think about our feet. And then, somebody might say, hey, are you conscious of your feet? And then all of a sudden there might be a way that body awareness in the feet becomes more bright, it becomes more alive, because our attention, whether we look down at our feet or not, I'm not necessarily saying our directed attention, but just our engaged attention may kind of light up the area of the feet that are, let's say, touching the earth right now, if you might, or touching your chair, touching the carpet. So when our consciousness lights up body consciousness, or our awareness is offered to body awareness in a specific region, it then avails of some of the nourishments that I was talking about earlier. Things that when they are given attention, they tend to thrive, typically. So if you can attune to some of these aches or blocks or pressures and give them your attention, sometimes the pressure gets greater, but it depends what quality of attention you're amping up. So if you're like overly curious and you want to fix it and you're giving it your attention, that part must be like, back off, and it feels like it gets exacerbated, but if your attention's like more quiet and imparts more of that nourishment of stillness, the kind of sense of attention that's not moving, even if it's observing movement or pressure. But if you have that knowingness of the quality of attention, that you kind of where attention, what it's informed by, a kind of stillness, or at least we could say it feels still in contrast to the movements that it tracks. So you could maybe highlight that. Or if the ache feels like it could benefit from a sense of space around it, you might give it your attention and communicate to it that there's all this space around you, and you might have your awareness not only be focused and directed on a sensation, let's say in the stomach, but also have your awareness be more open and global, so that you can highlight that open global space for that ache that may feel confined, and you could communicate and ask it, are you aware that there's all this space around you? and the brightness of your global awareness that's kind of lighting up that space may make it more easily recognized by the body. The body may become more aware of the space all around it, and that which is unboundaried, and that might help relieve the pressure. This doesn't mean that there isn't a time to go to doctors, which I'm so glad you're doing, and a time to address things in a myriad of ways. I mean, it could be so many things: movement, diet. There's a bazillion ways to support these energies, but in order for what they need to be supported to become more conscious, it often requires our attention and our time to be, really deeply listening to our bodies, really, really conscious of what we're doing in the day that might exacerbate a difficult sensation, and to be able to track and be conscious of those factors that are exacerbants. So I imagine that you know a lot of these things, but there might be some things that I mentioned that weren't in your mix that I'm hoping to add to your toolbox. The other thing that I was thinking of for you there in Sweden is one thing that you might find support with is, besides all the things that I've been mentioning, this offering of your attention, your awareness, your global awareness, this intimacy with your experience of becoming more curious, and maybe even journaling about it, tracking notes of what exacerbates it, what it doesn't. But also you might see how you resonate with the yogic qigong, a video that I offer on the YouTube. I think it's the Mukti YouTube channel. Just see how if any of the exercises on that, even as you're watching them, or if you feel able to do them, which most people I know are able to do them, then see if there's any of those exercises that seem to support the energy in your system, and to support it moving in a way that it may feel like it's been, wanting to move, or not have to move. If it wants to just, be and not be put upon. Okay, so I wish you much luck with that. Here's another question about energetics in the body. Since the beginning of the 2-month retreat, when I start my meditation time, or when I go to my heart with my soul, my body shakes a lot. I'm not sure of the English here. It says, "Is it a way helping me? Is it because I am old? All gratitude." Nicole. So I don't know for sure the answer, but I think some of the things I was just saying might be helpful. Usually, if the shaking's just associated with meditation, I wouldn't think that it was because you're getting older. I really wouldn't. That wouldn't even enter my mind. But if you're shaking outside of meditation and you just become conscious of it when you actually stop and sit down to meditation, then there may be some correlations with that. Not everybody that gets older is shaking, but it's probably more prevalent in some people that are older, depending upon their sort of ecosystem of health, you could say. If you have the sense that the shaking is happening outside of meditation time, and you're only becoming conscious of it more when you try to sit still, then I'd really recommend that you seek some support through some different types of medicine. when I was a Chinese medicine doctor, different people would come in with shaking, and there's a lot of different patterns that can cause that can be supported. And perhaps many other avenues of medicine support that as well. So it can be worth looking into at that level. If it's just starting during meditation, one basic thing that I would really recommend is making sure your posture is aligned and with heaven and earth, and really putting a lot of your attention on earth. Because sometimes when our energy predominantly goes up without a sense of rooting, it can be like that candle that I was talking about, where the energy's rising and whipping around in a way that's more shaky and almost like windy. And if your consciousness and your posture really focuses on a sense of connecting with earth and that grounding, it can be like that candle that instead of whipping around becomes much more straight and still by comparison. And so you could really focus on that sense of stillness and settling and anchoring and rooting, and see how that might come into the mix of the energy. And the energy that's in movement might even be, you might encourage the energy itself to become more conscious, almost like asking it. I've asked energy, like, do you sense the stillness that is present within movement? What can you tell me of the stillness that's present within you as movement? These can evoke a different expression of consciousness in these energetics. Be really helpful. Okay, so I think that's about as much as we'll get to for this show tonight, but I think we covered quite a bit. And if I didn't cover it, please write in again and see if it might be covered on the next show. Let's just take a moment to conclude our time together. I want to just invite you to settle into a more meditative posture, and to invite your attention to rest in your heart center. And if you like, you can place your palm or both palms along your midline here in the area of the heart. And to see if you can have your attention descend and drop down from that internal gaze that might look forward and track your thoughts or different things in your visual field, and instead have that attention just drop down and descend into the heart without needing to see anything in particular. Just activating that sense of body consciousness of this general area of the chest, inviting it to enliven and perhaps expand and breathe more deeply, to open into a sense of spaciousness that surrounds the body and infuses the body, infuses the breath and the chest. Just see if you can reconnect your attention to this general area of the heart space. And if you like, you can press your fingertips along the breastbone here, just right in the center, as though anchoring your attention more specifically, and with a sense of resting that attention, just like your fingertips are resting on the breastbone. Just inviting your attention to rest into the heart. And then taking a few moments to say to the heart space that this time is just for you. And I invite you to be and express your nature in this moment, however it might present. You can just ask the heart if it might want to express its consciousness of stillness, or space, or light, brightness. And there's no right answer, just being present for your direct experience. But these kinds of questions can be an opportunity over time for you to connect with your heart center, and to also offer this gift of your awareness that can be informed by these qualities of stillness and space and brightness, and to see how your heart center or your body or any given emotion might respond to these nutrients, and they might evoke those qualities in the heart center, or an altogether different response may come about. But you can set them aside if this doesn't resonate. But if it resonates, you can continue with this kind of investigation within yourself and see how what comes to life, expresses in your experience as an individual, but also how it informs your relationships. So thank you again for all of you who wrote in, and all of you who have tuned in and deeply listened and are applying your deepest interests in your life. Really commendable. Thank you.